The evening sun hung low over the city, painting the streets in shades of orange and gold. The sound of car horns and footsteps filled the air as people hurried in and out of the Grand Plaza Mall. It was just another busy day for David, a tall, soft-spoken security guard who had been working at the mall for nearly 4 years. He stood at his usual spot near the main entrance, his black uniform neat and pressed, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet focus. David wasn't one to talk much while on duty. He took pride in doing his job properly, always polite and respectful to shoppers even when they ignored him. To most people, he was just another face in a uniform, someone they passed without a second thought. But to David, this job meant everything. It paid the bills, kept food on the table, and helped him support his wife and 2 young children. Life wasn't easy, but he was grateful to have steady work. That evening, as the crowd began to thin out, David noticed something strange near the far corner of the entrance. A small boy, maybe 12 or 13, was standing by the glass doors watching people go in and out. He wasn't selling anything, nor did he seem to be waiting for anyone. His clothes were worn out, his shoes dusty, and his face looked tired and pale. He clutched his stomach from time to time as if he were hungry. David watched him for a few minutes, unsure of what to do. The mall had strict rules about loitering. Guards were supposed to move along anyone who wasn't shopping or working there. But there was something about the boy that caught David's attention. Something in his eyes, a quiet desperation that reminded him of his own struggles when he was younger. He decided to walk over. "Hey, kid," David said gently. "You okay?" The boy flinched a little, startled by the voice. He looked up at David, then quickly lowered his gaze. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though his voice was weak. David frowned. "You've been standing here for a while. You waiting for someone?" The boy shook his head slowly. "No, sir. You hungry?" David asked quietly. The boy hesitated. His lips trembled as he tried to hold back tears. Finally, he nodded. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." David's chest tightened. He looked around to make sure no one was watching too closely, then leaned closer. "Come with me," he said softly. "Just for a minute." He guided the boy toward a side door that led to the staff area. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and coffee. He led him into the small security office, a cramped room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of monitors showing live footage from the mall. David opened his lunchbox, which he hadn't touched yet. There was a sandwich, an apple, and a small carton of milk. He handed it all to the boy. "Here," he said. "Eat." The boy stared at the food, hesitant at first. "I don't want to get you in trouble," he whispered. David smiled kindly. "Don't worry about that, just eat. You look like you need it more than I do." The boy nodded and began eating quickly, almost desperately. David watched him, feeling both sadness and relief. He remembered the days when he too had gone hungry, before he found stable work. Seeing the boy devour every bite brought back memories he had long buried. When the boy finished, he leaned back in the chair, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "I was so hungry I thought I might pass out." "What's your name?" David asked. "Ethan," the boy replied. "My mom got sick a few months ago. Things got bad. I tried to get a job washing cars, but nobody wanted to hire me." He looked down at his shoes. "I just wanted to find something to eat." David felt a lump form in his throat. "Where are you staying now?" Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes at the shelter. Sometimes outside if it's full." David nodded slowly. He wanted to help more, but he knew there was only so much he could do. He wasn't rich. In fact, he barely made enough to keep his own family comfortable, but something inside him refused to send the boy back out into the cold. "You can rest here for a bit," David said, "but you can't stay too long. The supervisor doesn't like visitors." Ethan smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir. I promise I won't cause trouble." For the next half hour, David went back to his post, checking in on Ethan every few minutes. The boy had fallen asleep in the chair, his head resting on his arms. He looked peaceful for the first time in who knows how long. David felt good about what he had done. Maybe it wasn't much, but sometimes a small act of kindness could mean the world to someone who had nothing. Just as he began to relax, the door behind him swung open sharply. "David," a stern voice called out. It was his supervisor, Mr. Collins, a strict man in his 50s with a sharp suit and an even sharper tone. He was the kind of boss who measured everything by the rule book. David straightened immediately. "Yes, sir? What's going on here?" Collins demanded, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the small figure asleep in the corner. Who is that? David took a deep breath. Just a boy, sir. He was hungry. I gave him some food. You brought a stranger into the staff area? Collins snapped. You know the policy. No unauthorized persons allowed inside the security zone. I understand, sir, David said calmly. But he was starving. I couldn't just ignore him. That isn't your decision to make, Collins barked. You represent this mall. We can't have people like that wandering around. What if something happened? What if he stole something? David glanced at the boy who had woken up and now looked terrified. He wouldn't do that. He's just a kid in need. Collins crossed his arms. I don't care what his story is. Rules are rules. You've put the mall's reputation at risk. I'll have to report this. Sir, please, David said quietly. If you want to write me up, fine. But don't blame the boy. He didn't do anything wrong. Collins shook his head. This isn't up for debate. You're relieved of duty effective immediately. Hand over your badge and keys. The words hit David like a punch to the chest. Fired, just like that. For showing a little kindness. He unclipped his badge, placed it on the table, and handed over his keys without a word. His heart was heavy, but his face remained calm. Collins gestured for the boy to leave, but Ethan clung to David's sleeve. I'm sorry, Ethan whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. I didn't mean to get you in trouble. David knelt down and looked him in the eye. Hey, it's okay, he said softly. You did nothing wrong. Promise me something, though. Don't give up. No matter how hard life gets, keep trying, all right? The boy nodded slowly, his lip trembling. I will. I promise, David managed a small smile. That's all I need to hear. As he walked out of the mall that night, his uniform cap tucked under his arm, David felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. He had lost his job, yes, but deep down he knew he had done the right thing. The streets were quiet now, the neon lights reflecting off puddles from an earlier rain. He walked home slowly, thinking about his family, wondering how he would explain what happened. Behind him, Ethan watched from the shadows, his heart breaking. He wanted to call out to stop him, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was whisper to himself, One day I'll make it up to you. David disappeared into the night, unaware that this small act of kindness would come back to him in ways he could never have imagined. The night David lost his job felt longer than any other. The walk home was quiet except for the soft tap of his shoes on the wet pavement. He held his uniform cap in one hand and his small lunchbox in the other, the same one he had carried every day for years. He tried not to think too much about what had just happened, but the words of his supervisor echoed in his head. Fired. Just like that. No warning. No second chance. When he reached his small home on the edge of town, the lights were still on. His wife, Ruth, was sitting at the table, helping their daughter with homework. The smell of soup filled the air. It was a simple meal, but it was warm, and for a moment David felt comforted just being there. Ruth looked up and smiled when she saw him, but her smile faded when she noticed the look on his face. What happened? She asked softly. David put down his cap and sat at the table, his shoulders heavy. He told her everything about the boy, the food, and how the supervisor caught them. He didn't try to defend himself much. He just told it plain the way it happened. Ruth listened quietly. When he finished, she didn't scold him. She didn't sigh or cry. She simply reached across the table and took his hand. You did the right thing, she said. We'll figure something out. We always do. Her words gave him a bit of strength, but still the fear crept in. They had bills to pay, and without his job, things would get hard fast. He tried to hide his worry from the kids, but Ruth could see it in his eyes. The next morning, he woke up early and started calling around. He went from one security agency to another, asking if they had openings. Most places said they weren't hiring. A few said they would call him back, but the calls never came. Days turned into weeks, and every morning he went out with his old briefcase, hoping for something new. Every evening he came home with tired feet and empty hands. Ruth started taking extra work at a laundry shop nearby. She never complained, but David could tell it was wearing her down. Their savings began to shrink. Some nights they had to skip meat and eat only rice and vegetables. Still, they made sure the children never went hungry. David often said, as long as they have food and a roof, we'll be fine. But deep down, he knew things were getting harder. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the boy, Ethan. He wondered if he was okay, if he had found shelter or someone to help him. He hoped so. Even though losing his job hurt, he didn't regret what he did. If he had to choose again, he knew he would make the same choice. Months passed. David finally found part-time work at a construction site, watching over equipment at night. It paid less than half of what he used to earn, but at least it was something. He didn't complain. He showed up early every day and stayed late when asked. The younger workers respected him for his calmness and honesty. One night, as he sat under a flickering lamp guarding the site, an old co-worker from the mall stopped by. His name was Peter, another guard who used to share lunch breaks with him. "David," Peter said, smiling sadly, "heard what happened back then. I wanted to tell you, most of us thought it was wrong. The way they fired you. That supervisor got promoted. Can you believe that?" David chuckled softly, though there was no joy in it. "Doesn't surprise me. That's how things go sometimes," Peter nodded. "Still, you did what any good man would have done. Not everyone has the courage to do that." They talked for a while, then Peter left and David went back to watching the gate. He looked up at the stars, feeling a strange peace. Life was unfair, but he had no bitterness in his heart. He believed someday things would turn around. Over the next year, work came and went. Some days he had long shifts. Other times he had nothing at all. He fixed fences, painted houses, even helped neighbors repair roofs when he could. People in his small community came to respect him for his honesty and willingness to help. He never took more money than what was fair, and if someone couldn't pay, he would still do the job. "Kindness doesn't need a price," he would say. Ruth often worried about him. "You work too hard for too little," she would tell him. But David always smiled. "As long as we have peace at home, I'm rich enough." Still, there were days when doubt crept in. Sometimes he wondered if his act of kindness had cursed him, if maybe life punished good people more than it rewarded them. But then he would see his children laughing, running around the small yard, and he would remember that there was more to life than money or pride. 5 years passed slowly. The family learned to live with less. Their clothes grew old but were always clean. Their home stayed humble but full of laughter. David never complained. He fixed things around the neighborhood, helped the elderly carry groceries, and sometimes volunteered at the local shelter on weekends. He said it reminded him of what really mattered, helping people who had no one. The shelter's manager, an older woman named Mrs. Carter, often told him, "You have a good heart. David, don't ever lose that." One evening, as David swept the front steps of the shelter, a small boy walked in, holding his mother's hand. They looked lost and scared. The sight hit David like a memory. He thought of Ethan again, that thin, hungry face from years ago. Sometimes he wondered where he was, what became of him. He had never seen him again after that night. Later, while walking home, he passed by the Grand Plaza Mall. The lights still shone bright, the glass doors spotless, just like the old days. He stood across the street for a long moment, watching people walk in and out. The guard at the gate wore the same uniform he once did. For a brief second, David missed it, the routine, the pride of standing tall at the door. But then he remembered how easily it had been taken away, and he turned to walk home. When he reached his small house, Ruth greeted him at the door with a smile. "You're late," she said. "Dinner's getting cold," David smiled back. "Sorry, had to fix the fence for Mr. Lee. His dog keeps escaping." Ruth shook her head. "You never say no to anyone, do you?" He laughed softly. "Maybe that's my problem." They ate dinner together, talking about small things, the children's school, the weather, the neighbor's new garden. It wasn't a fancy life, but it was honest and peaceful. After dinner, David sat outside on the porch watching the stars again. The air was cool and calm. He closed his eyes and thought of all the choices he had made. He had lost a lot, but he had also gained something stronger, a quiet kind of strength that no job could give. As he sat there, he didn't know that life was about to change again. Somewhere far away, a young man was preparing to fulfill a promise made years ago, a promise made on a rainy night outside a shopping mall, a promise to repay a kindness that had never been forgotten. David sighed, stood up, and went inside. He didn't have much, but he had peace, and that was enough for now. But the universe had other plans, and soon a sound of an engine would echo down his quiet street, carrying with it a piece of the past that was about to return in the most unexpected way. The morning sun crept through the thin curtains of David's small house, lighting up the worn wooden floor. He stretched his back and got ready for another day of work. It had been 5 years since he lost his job at the mall, but life had slowly settled into a simple rhythm. Every day started early and ended late, but he was thankful that he still had work, no matter how small the job. He worked as a watchman at a small warehouse now, a quiet job that didn't pay much but helped keep food on the table. On weekends, he took small repair jobs around the neighborhood, fixing broken locks, patching fences, or painting old walls. People trusted him because he was honest and dependable. He never overcharged anyone, and he always showed up when he said he would. His wife, Ruth, had started selling homemade snacks at the bus station nearby. It wasn't easy, but she made enough to help pay for the children's school fees. Their daughter, Anna, was now in high school, and their son, Ben, had just turned 8. Despite the struggles, there was laughter in their small home. David made sure of that. He believed that even in hard times, joy shouldn't disappear. One Saturday afternoon, David was outside fixing the gate when his neighbor, Mr. Lee, walked over. "You work too hard, David," he said, handing him a bottle of cold water. "Take a break once in a while," David smiled. "I'll rest when everything's fixed," Mr. Lee chuckled. "If you wait for that, you'll never rest." They both laughed. Life was simple in their neighborhood. People helped one another. When someone was short on groceries, others shared what they had. When someone was sick, neighbors checked in. It wasn't a rich place, but it was full of good people. That evening, after dinner, David sat on the porch with Ruth. The children were inside watching television. Fireflies danced in the dark, and the distant sound of a train echoed through the quiet street. Ruth looked at him and asked, "Do you ever think about going back to the mall? Maybe asking if they'd hire you again?" David shook his head slowly. "No use in that. They replaced me a long time ago. Besides, I'm at peace now. What happened back then? Maybe it was meant to happen." Ruth sighed but didn't argue. She knew her husband had made peace with the past, but she also knew he carried a quiet sadness deep inside. Losing that job had hurt his pride. Yet, he never complained, never blamed anyone. Late that night, when everyone was asleep, David sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. He thought about that boy, Ethan. He often wondered what had become of him. Did he ever get the help he needed? Was he still out there struggling? Sometimes David even prayed for him. He didn't know why the boy stayed in his thoughts for so long, but he couldn't forget the look in his eyes, that mix of fear and hope. The next morning, he went to the warehouse early. It was a quiet Sunday shift. Most of the workers were off, and his job was simply to make sure everything stayed safe. Around midday, a food delivery truck stopped outside. The driver, a friendly man, handed him a sandwich and a drink. "You always sit out here alone, man. Figured you could use some lunch." David smiled, surprised. "Thank you. That's kind of you." The driver shrugged. "Kindness goes around, brother. You give it, you get it back." Those words stayed with him. He smiled as he ate, thinking about how life had its way of circling back. A few weeks later, David got a call from a nearby school. They needed someone to fix their broken gate and paint a few classroom doors. It wasn't much money, but it was steady work for a few weeks. He accepted without hesitation. The school was small but full of energy. Children ran around laughing, their shoes kicking up dust from the playground. Watching them made David smile. It reminded him of his own kids and of a time when the world still felt simple. One afternoon, as he was painting a door, a teacher approached him. "You're doing great work," she said warmly. "We need more people like you, people who care about what they do." David nodded, a little shy. "Thank you. I just like to leave things better than I found them." The teacher smiled and left him to his work. As he painted, he hummed softly, lost in thought. Life wasn't perfect, but it had meaning. Every job he did, every person he helped, made him feel like he still mattered. When the school project ended, the principal handed him a small envelope. "A little extra," she said. "You've been a blessing to us." David thanked her, his heart full. On the way home, he stopped by the market and bought a few treats for the family. Fresh bread, some fruit, and a small toy car for Ben. When he got home, the children ran to hug him, their laughter filling the air. Ruth smiled when she saw the food. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," David replied. "But sometimes it feels good to bring home a surprise." That night, they all ate together, talking and laughing. For a moment, everything felt perfect. David sat quietly watching his family, thinking that maybe this was the reward life had given him. Not money or luxury, but love, peace, and the strength to keep going. Still, There were days when he felt tired, tired of struggling, tired of waiting for things to get better. Some nights when the bills piled up, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if his kindness had cost him too much. But whenever those thoughts came, he remembered the boy's words from years ago. "I'll make it up to you someday." It was just a promise from a scared child, yet for some reason it always gave him hope. One rainy evening, as David walked home from the warehouse, he saw a young man standing under a bus stop shelter. The rain poured heavily and the man was struggling to keep his papers dry. Without thinking, David walked over and held his old umbrella over both of them. The young man looked surprised. "Thank you, sir," David smiled. "No trouble. Rain doesn't care about age or clothes. It soaks everyone," they both laughed. When the bus arrived, the young man shook his hand and said, "You're a good man, sir. The world needs more like you." As David watched the bus pull away, he felt a strange warmth in his heart. Kindness still mattered, even if the world often forgot it. Weeks went by and life carried on. The children grew taller, Ruth kept working hard, and David continued his small jobs. Their house remained humble, but it was filled with love and laughter. He still passed by the mall sometimes, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of how far he had come. He didn't know that somewhere, not too far away, someone was looking for him. Someone who hadn't forgotten the man who had once given him food and kindness when he had nothing. It was late one Friday evening when David came home, soaked from the rain. He took off his shoes at the door, tired but content. Ruth handed him a towel and smiled. "Another long day?" he nodded. "Yes, but at least the rain cooled the air." After dinner, they sat together, talking quietly. The sound of rain tapping the roof was steady and calming. Ruth leaned on his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I feel like something good is coming." "I don't know what, but I can feel it," David chuckled. "Maybe it's just the rain making you feel dreamy." But in truth, he felt it too, a strange sense that something was about to change. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, like a whisper in the back of his mind. The next morning, the sun returned, bright and clear. David stepped outside to fix the front fence, humming quietly to himself. The street was peaceful, children playing in the distance. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and took a sip of water. Then he heard it, the deep hum of an engine approaching. It grew louder until a black luxury car turned the corner and slowly pulled up in front of his house. The neighbors looked on curiously. The car was sleek, shiny, and clearly expensive, a kind of car that didn't belong on their street. David straightened up, confused. He didn't recognize the car. The tinted window rolled down slowly, and a well-dressed young man looked out. He smiled warmly, eyes bright with emotion. "Sir?" the young man called, stepping out of the car. "Do you remember me?" David frowned, trying to place the face. There was something familiar about the eyes, the voice, a memory tugging at the edges of his mind. And then, like a flash, he remembered. The boy from the mall. The boy he had fed 5 years ago. His heart skipped a beat as he stared, speechless. The young man walked closer, still smiling, and said softly, "I told you I'd come back one day." David stood frozen for a moment, staring at the young man who stepped out of the luxury car. The air around him felt still, like time itself had stopped. The young man smiled gently and walked toward him, his steps confident but respectful. His suit looked sharp, his shoes polished, and yet there was something in his eyes that carried warmth and gratitude. "Sir," the young man said again, stopping a few steps away. "It's me, Ethan. You helped me years ago, outside the mall." David's eyes widened slightly. He couldn't believe it. The small, thin boy who once stood hungry and lost outside the mall was now standing before him. A grown man, strong and full of life. For a moment, David didn't know what to say. Ethan smiled, noticing the disbelief on his face. "You probably don't recognize me right away. I've changed a lot since that night. But I never forgot you." David finally found his voice. "You're that boy from the mall?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. The guard who fed me when no one else would. The one who lost his job because of me." David waved his hand gently. "Don't say that, son. You didn't make me lose anything. I made a choice that day, and I'd make it again if I had to." Ethan's smile trembled a little. "You don't know what that moment meant to me. You gave me food when I hadn't eaten in days. You treated me like a person when everyone else looked away. I promised myself that if I ever made it, I'd find you. By now, Ruth had come out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. The children peeked from the window, curious about the expensive car and the stranger outside. David turned to them and said softly, "It's all right. Come, meet someone special." Ethan greeted Ruth with a respectful nod. "Ma'am," he said warmly, "I'm sorry to just show up like this, but I needed to see him. I needed to thank him in person." Ruth looked surprised but smiled kindly. Anyone who remembers kindness after all these years is always welcome here. They all sat together on the small porch. Ethan looked around at the modest home. The old wooden chairs, the faded paint, the little flower pots lined up neatly by the steps. He smiled softly. "This place feels peaceful," he said. David chuckled. "It's not much, but it's home." For a while they talked about the past. Ethan told them about what happened after that night at the mall. A social worker found him wandering the streets a few days later and took him to a shelter. From there, he was placed with a foster family who helped him go back to school. "It wasn't easy," he said, "but I studied hard. I wanted to make something of myself. I wanted to be worthy of the kindness you showed me." He told them how he got into college on a scholarship, studied computer science, and later started a small tech company with 2 friends. "We built apps for small businesses," he explained. "At first it was just a small dream, but it grew. Now we work with companies from all over the country." David and Ruth listened quietly, their faces full of pride and amazement. "That's incredible," Ruth said softly. "You've done well for yourself," Ethan nodded. "I've been blessed, ma'am. But none of it would have happened if that night went differently. I might not even be here if it weren't for him." He looked at David again, eyes full of gratitude. "You changed my life without even knowing it." David's eyes grew misty. He smiled and said, "I didn't do much. I just gave you some food." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, sir. You gave me hope. When you're at your lowest, even a little kindness feels like a miracle." The air grew quiet for a moment. The sound of children playing down the street filled the silence. David looked at the young man before him and felt something stir deep in his chest, a mixture of pride, relief, and disbelief. He had often wondered what became of that boy, and now here he was standing before him as proof that good deeds never truly disappear. Ethan took a deep breath and said, "I wanted to thank you properly. Words aren't enough. Please come with me for a minute." He stood and walked toward the car, gesturing for David to follow. Ruth looked on curiously as David wiped his hands on his pants and got up. Ethan opened the car door and pulled out a small folder. Inside was a set of documents and a shiny key. David frowned slightly. "What's this?" Ethan smiled. "It's for you. A small way to say thank you." He handed over the key and continued. "There's a car parked at the dealership under your name, and inside this folder is the paperwork. It's all yours." David blinked in disbelief. "Son, I can't accept that. That's too much." Ethan shook his head. "It's not too much. Not for what you gave me. You gave me a start when I had nothing. This isn't payment, it's gratitude." David tried to hand the key back. "I don't need anything, really. Knowing you made it, that's enough." Ethan smiled and gently closed David's fingers around the key. "Please, sir, let me do this. You once told me to never give up. I didn't. And it's all because someone believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Ruth walked closer, her eyes glistening. "David," she said softly, "maybe it's time to let someone be kind to you for once." David looked at her, then at Ethan. His voice trembled as he said, "Thank you, son. You didn't have to do this, but I'm proud of the man you've become." Ethan smiled, his own eyes wet. "And I'm proud to know you, sir." They stood there for a long moment, shaking hands. Then Ethan looked at the small house again and said, "I know you're a humble man, but I also know how hard life can be. There's one more thing I'd like to do if you'll allow it." David frowned slightly. "What is it?" Ethan handed him another envelope. Inside was a letter and some papers. "I bought a small security company recently," he explained. "We provide guards for private businesses. I want you to be part of it, not as a regular guard, but as a supervisor. You'll have a proper salary, benefits, everything. You've earned it." David stared at him speechless. He had worked small jobs for years, never expecting another chance like this. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the papers, then back at Ethan. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ethan replied with a smile. "You've spent your life helping people. Let someone help you now." Ruth wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're an angel, young man, truly." Ethan laughed softly. No, ma'am. Just someone who remembers what kindness feels like. They all went back to the porch and talked for hours. Ethan told them more about his company, his journey, and the lessons he learned along the way. The children sat quietly listening, their eyes wide with admiration. To them, Ethan seemed like a hero from a story, a living reminder that good things do come back around. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ethan stood to leave. I have to go, he said softly, but I'll be back soon. I want you to come visit my office next week. Everything's ready for you to start. David nodded slowly, still trying to take it all in. You really didn't have to go this far, son. But thank you from the bottom of my heart, Ethan smiled. You taught me something that night. That kindness isn't weakness. It's strength. And the world needs more people like you. He turned to Ruth. Ma'am, thank you for welcoming me. You've raised a strong family. Ruth smiled warmly. Thank you for remembering what matters most. As Ethan got back into his car, David walked up to him one last time. Drive safe, son, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. Ethan looked at him, eyes shining. I will, sir. And I'll see you soon. The car engine started and the vehicle rolled slowly down the quiet street. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering, wondering who the young man was and why such a fine car had come to David's house. But David didn't care about what they thought. He stood there watching until the car disappeared from view. When he finally turned around, Ruth was standing in the doorway, smiling through her tears. See, she said softly. I told you something good was coming. David laughed quietly, wiping his eyes. You were right, as always. That night, as the house grew quiet and the children slept, David sat by the window once more. He looked out at the stars and thought about how life had come full circle. 5 years ago, he had lost everything for helping a hungry boy. Tonight, that same boy had returned as a successful man, bringing not only gratitude but hope. He whispered softly to himself, what you give from the heart always finds its way back. And in that moment, with the cool night breeze brushing against his face, David smiled, a deep, peaceful smile that came from knowing that kindness, no matter how small, never truly fades away. The next few days passed slowly for David. He still found it hard to believe that the young man who had once stood outside the mall, shivering and hungry, was now a successful businessman who had come back to find him. Every morning he would glance at the shiny car key resting on the shelf, half expecting it all to vanish like a dream. But it was real. The letter was real. The offer was real. On the morning of his meeting, Ruth pressed his shirt carefully and smiled as she helped him get ready. You look handsome, she said, her eyes bright with pride. You deserve this, David chuckled softly. I haven't been this nervous in years. You'll do fine, she said reassuringly. He wouldn't have asked you if he didn't believe in you. As David drove toward the city, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Excitement, nervousness, gratitude, all blended together. The last time he had driven through those streets, he had been searching for work, holding on to hope that someone might give him a chance. Today, he was going to meet the man who had once been the boy he had saved. The office building stood tall and modern, with glass walls that reflected the morning sun. When David parked outside, a young receptionist greeted him kindly and led him to an elevator. Mr. Ethan is expecting you, she said with a smile. When the elevator doors opened, David stepped out onto a floor that looked bright and welcoming. There were plants by the windows, open workspaces, and people talking softly as they worked on computers. A large sign on the wall displayed the company's name in clean silver letters. It all felt unreal. Ethan appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward him with that same warm smile. You made it, he said cheerfully. I'm really glad you came. David smiled, shaking his hand. It's good to see you again, son. This place, it's something else, Ethan laughed softly. It's taken a lot of work, but every bit of it was worth it. He guided David through the office, introducing him to a few employees along the way. Everyone greeted David respectfully, and Ethan proudly told them, This is the man who taught me what real kindness means. David felt humbled by the attention, but also deeply touched. He could see how much Ethan truly meant every word. They reached Ethan's office, a bright room with large windows overlooking the city. There were photos on the desk, one of Ethan as a child, another of his foster parents, and one of him at a company event surrounded by smiling employees. On the wall hung a framed quote that read, Kindness is never wasted. Ethan motioned for him to sit down. "I meant what I said the other day," he began. "The position is yours if you want it. You'll be supervising a few sites, managing the guards, making sure they're treated fairly. You know this work better than anyone." David hesitated. "Are you sure, son?" "I've been out of steady work for a while now. I don't know if I still have it in me." Ethan leaned forward. "I'm sure. I didn't pick you because of your resume. I picked you because of who you are. You understand people, and that's what matters most." There was a long pause before David nodded slowly. "Then I'll do my best." "You have my word." Ethan's smile widened. "That's all I could ask for." They spent the rest of the morning going over the details, schedules, locations, and responsibilities. David listened carefully, feeling both nervous and excited. By the time he left the office, he felt a quiet sense of purpose returning to his heart. Weeks passed, and David settled into his new role. The job suited him well. The younger guards respected him immediately, not just for his experience, but for the way he treated everyone fairly. He listened to their problems, offered advice, and often reminded them that their work mattered. Under his supervision, morale improved, and the company's clients began to notice the change. Ethan visited the sites often, sometimes just to chat. He and David would sit under the shade of a tree during breaks, talking about life and the paths they had taken. "Funny how things turn around," Ethan said one day. "I used to think the world was unfair, that kindness didn't matter. But you proved me wrong." David smiled gently. "Kindness doesn't always pay right away, son, but it always finds its way back." The bond between them grew stronger over time. Ethan treated David like family, often inviting him and Ruth to company dinners and events. Ruth enjoyed those evenings, chatting with the staff and watching how proudly Ethan introduced David to everyone. "He's like a son to you," she whispered once during one of those gatherings. David nodded quietly. "Maybe he is, and I'm proud of him like one." One afternoon, a local newspaper contacted Ethan after hearing about his company's story. They wanted to do a feature on how it started and what inspired it. During the interview, Ethan mentioned David's name with a smile. "This company exists because one man decided to care when he didn't have to," he said. "He taught me that success means nothing if you forget your humanity." When the article was published, people from all over sent letters and emails praising both men. Some shared their own stories of how small acts of kindness had changed their lives. It was as if their story had sparked something, a reminder that good people still existed in the world. Months turned into a year. The company grew even more successful, and David continued to work with dedication. But no matter how busy things got, Ethan always made time to visit David and his family. Sometimes he'd bring dinner, sometimes gifts for the children, but most of all he brought warmth. One evening, after another long day at work, Ethan drove over to David's house just as the sun was setting. The sky glowed orange and the air smelled of rain. Ruth had cooked dinner, and they all sat together laughing and sharing stories. Afterward, Ethan walked with David to the porch where they both stood watching the streetlights flicker on. Ethan turned to him and said softly, "You know, I've met a lot of people in my life now. Businessmen, investors, all kinds, but none of them taught me what you did. You showed me what real strength looks like." David looked at him, surprised. "Strength?" "I don't know about that," Ethan nodded. "Yes, strength. You lost your job that day, but you didn't lose your heart. You kept believing in goodness even when the world turned its back on you. That takes strength," David smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I just did what I thought was right." "And that," Ethan said, "is exactly why you're different." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the distant sound of crickets. Then David spoke quietly. "You've become a fine man, Ethan. I hope you keep leading with kindness." "The world needs more of it," Ethan smiled. "I'll try, and I'll never forget where I learned it." As time went on, their friendship became something truly special. David's story began to spread, not because he told it, but because others did. People in the community started recognizing him, greeting him respectfully wherever he went. He never sought fame, but somehow kindness had made him known. Years later, as David sat on the same porch where it all began, he thought about how life had come full circle. His children were grown now, his hair was graying, and the car Ethan had given him still sat in the driveway, a symbol of a moment that had changed both their lives forever. Ethan still visited often, sometimes bringing his own children along, He wanted them to meet the man who had once changed his world with a simple act of compassion. David would tell them stories about hard work, honesty, and why helping someone in need is never wasted effort. Life has a way of coming back around, he'd say softly. You might not see it right away, but the good you do never disappears. On one of those evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan looked at David and said, "You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night." David smiled. "Then maybe someone else would have helped you." "But I'm glad it was me," Ethan nodded. "Me too." They both laughed quietly, the sound blending with the evening breeze. It wasn't just a friendship anymore. It was something deeper, built on gratitude, faith, and shared humanity. And as the stars began to appear in the sky, David leaned back in his chair, his heart full. He had no riches, no fancy title, but he had something far greater. A life that had touched another and, in doing so, found its own meaning. Because sometimes, a single act of kindness can echo for a lifetime, turning strangers into family and proving that no good deed ever truly goes unnoticed.